Hello everyone, welcome to our daily channel. In this video I'm going to talk to you about Jake Tapper's moment of epiphany, where he realized that the Democrat Party has been capitalizing upon a rhetoric that is fueled by hatred and division. So Jake Tapper went on a left-leaning podcast and he was talking about his son, and they joked that his son was a racist. Why? Because he wants to be a cop. And he wasn't particularly happy about this. Let us hear what he has to say.
I went on a left-leaning podcast that shall remain nameless, and we were talking about my kids, because I think they were both people without kids. And they asked me about my son, and I said he was, he's a football player, and he wants to be a policeman. And their joke was about my 15-year-old son, oh, how does he feel about minorities? Like the idea that he wants to be a policeman, therefore he's racist, my son. And that was the big laugh. And then I got dragged in the comments and all that stuff. And I thought to myself, this is why you are losing elections.
100%.
Like my football playing son, who has no political views. He's 15. He thinks about World War II and gaming and playing linebacker. That's his world.
So this is, I think, a moment where Jake Tapper is asking, are we the baddies now? On the other hand, let's give some credit to the leftists of the podcast in which he went. What's more racist than caring about gaming? Well, yeah, silence is the best answer. I have 3 points to make. Number one, elite Democrats have absolutely zero excuse for saying that they did not know that their policies were policies that are based upon a narrative of hatred and division. They are based on critical race theory, on wokeness, and they are absolutely that. They are narratives that create a two-tier society. Then the Democrat base has a tremendous problem with respect to drawing a distinction between the stated intentions of a policy and the unintended consequences of their policy. And due to the fact that they have this problem, the elite Democrats are often driving policies forward that are masking a concealed agenda. Thus, a lot of the Democrat base actually is very naive and thinks that the purpose of wokeness is to end up in a non-racist society or a society that is somehow more humane. This is an absolute lie. And the third point is that elite Democrats have a habit of realizing the negative consequences of their policies only when they are personally affected, which has two further ramifications. Number one, it means that they are creating a society where we have an elite that doesn't care about people who disagree with them. They brand them as racists, and that's also all problems have been solved as far as they're concerned. And second, I think it shows a distinct lack of sympathy, because sympathy implies that we can learn by the pain of others. If the pain we learn from is only our own pain, then it means that we don't really care about each other. So all this message that the Democrats are the sensitive ones who just are very humane and care about humane relationship is basically a lie. So let me just start talking to you about a person that you all know and love, because I want to illustrate to you that the hatred and division of the Democrat Party isn't something that was just found out. It's hidden in plain sight. And I really think that Jake Tapper has actually no excuse for saying right now that he found out that the people who are in the Democrat base, or especially some people who are influencers there, the influencers, are essentially pushing forward a rhetoric that is inhumane and stupid. And I will show you examples by this person here, the darling of the left at the moment, Ibram X. Kendi. You all know and love him. And I want to show you some quotes of his and introduce them to Jake Tapper in case he doesn't know, and aid him into his journey of finding out. So the main issue is racism for the left. And racism is the cardinal sin for the left at the moment. And presumably you'd want someone to define racism. So, what is racism? Ibram X. Kendi has the answer for you. He asks himself in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, what is racism? Racism is a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial inequities. Now, can you think of a definition that is more crystal clear than this? Well, I think this is personally my favorite discussion of the topic, because it's basically so circular. He doesn't say anything. Then I want to show you how, for Kendi, anti-racism, which is the cure, is also impossible for human beings. It's the equivalent of what wisdom is for Socrates, who thought that only the gods are, typically speaking, wise, and we need to strive for wisdom, but we are never going to become gods. Here, Ibram X. Kendi takes this way of thinking about things and applies it to racism and anti-racism. And he says, no one becomes a racist or anti-racist. We can only strive to be one or the other. We can unknowingly strive to be a racist. We can knowingly strive to be an anti-racist. Like fighting an addiction, being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. And in some cases, because it's annoying, Ibram X. Kendi is arguing for bias training and microaggressions. And at some point, he was very much against the concept of microaggression because he implied that there can only be macroaggression, whatever. But Jake Tapper, you are finding out that you have been riding the wave of popularity of CRT, critical race theory, which says that whiteness is the worst thing that can ever happen to the world, the unique source of all evil. And according to that theory, you can unknowingly strive to be a racist. So, yeah, you have been capitalizing upon that rhetoric, and if not in your own case, you have been an ally of people who have been doing so. But suddenly, when your son was targeted by it, and I agree with you, it is a disgusting rhetoric, when your son was targeted by it, you had a moment of epiphany. Well, perhaps you should have seen it coming. And there are more things to be said here, because when we are constantly asked to meet a standard, first of all, we'd like that standard to be possible to meet, but also that standard to be a good one. So let's take aside for a moment the question of whether it's a good one or not, which I think the way Kendi goes about it is absolutely atrocious, and focus on the impossibility task. You are perennially accountable to an external authority that will constantly try to say that you can be unknowingly racist, and however much your being protests against this, you may not know that you're secretly a racist. So you or your immediate family, your son or your daughter may need a sort of correction by the wokerati. So these are the gates that you have been opening. And at some point, it's important to ask people, what is it exactly to meet the standard that you want me to meet? Well, Kendi has the answer for you as well. He says to truly be anti-racist is to be feminist. To truly be feminist is to be anti-racist. We cannot be anti-racist if we are homophobic or transphobic. All Black lives include those of poor transgender Black women, perhaps the most violated and oppressed of all the Black intersectional groups. Well, so this means that essentially you have to be pro-LGBTQ+ and pro-feminist. And if you ask Kendi whether there can be any contradictions within those camps, if there can be any camps with clashing views of what peaceful coexistence and respectful coexistence consists in within those groups, you are going to be immediately branded a far-right racist. And it is absolutely not the case that all these groups have compatible views of peaceful coexistence and respectful coexistence. So all this is just designed for a government to say, well, if you support my allies, you're good. If you don't support my allies enthusiastically, you're bad, you're an enemy, you're a far-right racist, you need to be marginalized and that's the most merciful scenario, because that's the scenario that they have been going for. Now, if you ask them whether these groups have clashes, and whether, for instance, you say that the trans camp has different views of peaceful coexistence to another group of feminists, the left is going to respond by saying, well, they are compatible. It's only evil far-right racists who imply that they are not, and there is no way to bind together to form an alliance of different groups than inventing a common enemy. That is why the left has been constantly capitalizing upon this rhetoric of the common enemy, and in some cases it can be your son, as Jake Tapper found out. And let us talk about what is concealed. What is the concealed agenda that the Democrat base can't understand and the elite Democrats are pushing forward? Because a lot of the consequences of these policies are entirely intended. They're not unintended consequences. They may look like to people who aren't particularly switched on, but they are entirely intended. So we have another quote by Ibram X. Kendi here, who says, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. So Kendi is not someone who says, contrary to what some people are trying to portray him, Kendi is not someone who is a non-racist. Kendi is someone who says we need racism from the other side. And here is where we have this discrepancy between the stated preferences and the stated intention in Democrat policy, but also the second-order consequences that aren't identical to the intentions that are being stated when the policy is being put forward. And a lot of them aren't. I will give credit to Kendi for this. He is way more upfront with what he is pushing forward than Democrat politicians have been. So the issue is that on the one hand, they have been saying that racism is evil and it's the worst thing ever, and we need a society without racism. But on the other hand, with the way that they are legislating, they are perpetuating racism. And why is this? Because legislation has within it the element of habituation, which is way more important than the stated intention of a policy. A lot of government policies are failing despite their stated intentions. Sometimes they bring forward the exact opposite consequence. Now, in this case, this presents us with a problem. How are we to think about these policies, if not by the stated intention? I think the best way to look at it is to focus on the concept of habituation and ask how a particular policy habituates the population. So, although the Democrats have been putting forward a critical race theory inspired policy that says that a society with racism is the worst thing ever, they are habituating people to think along racial lines. And they are habituating people to say that we need to discriminate on racial grounds. We need to discriminate on the basis of race. So whatever they're saying they want to do, we need to ask ourselves, what are they doing? How are they habituating the population to act with their legislation? How do they want to change people? And essentially what this is, I would say, a very cynical agenda, according to which the left is carving up the population. It finds its friends, it capitalizes upon groups, and then feeds them with resentment and victimhood mentality because they want them to be perennial victims, psychologically speaking, in order to turn that psychological pain and victimization into political support. And they are creating an environment where they're holding people to accountable to meeting standards that are impossible to meet, and standards that even if they were not impossible to meet, standards that are, in some cases, absolutely crazy, absolutely insane. Just saying that if you disagree with 100% of your child's self assessment or self portrayal or self description, you're a bad parent. This is an absolutely ridiculous standard to be asked to meet. And even if you can meet it, it's immoral. So the elite Democrats have absolutely zero excuse for saying that they do not know that they are trying to hold people accountable to evil, immoral, or straightforwardly impossible standards. And they are appealing to sentiment to such an extent, and by implication, subjectivizing legislation to such an extent that they are opening the gates for anti-rational, arbitrary, whimsical politics. The kind of politics they claim to hate and be a bulwark against. And I want to end up with the tendency of Democrats to find out about the negative consequences of their policies by reminding you of the case of Anna Kasparian. She unleashes on liberal intolerance that drove her away from Dems. She says it's disgusting. And let us remember what happened there. She ripped efforts to demonize and even dehumanize the other side while admitting she used to be a person who believed you could not be friends with conservatives or someone who supported Trump. Both women said they identified with disaffected Democrats who now feel unwelcome in their former party. Kasparian said a turning point for her was when she was scolded by liberals after confessing she was tearful to leave her house after being sexually assaulted by a homeless man while walking her dog in Los Angeles in 2022. I think it's absolutely natural, it's absolutely human to not want to be sexually assaulted when you're walking your dog at the park. But some leftists see things otherwise because they're really low in sympathy. They don't actually love people. They love their idea of people. They love the idea of posing in front of an audience. But narrative is more important to flesh and blood human beings for them. That is why every time someone says, well, I feel the negative consequences of our policies, which poses strain upon our narratives of human perfection and multicultural utopia, they meet invariably with a response that you're an evil far-right racist who is going against a narrative. And I think that there are deeply inhumane tendencies within the Democrat Party and within the left, and it's good for people to go out and talk about them. I don't think that there is excuse for elite Democrats to say that they just found out, but such as it is, okay, it's better for them to speak up against it and say that their narrative has flaws. At the moment, the Democrat Party seems to have capitalized upon that rhetoric so much that I think everything leads to a woke AOC in 2028 campaign who is going to combine Bernie Sanders' economics with woke rhetoric. And I think that people like Jake Tapper, who suddenly found out, within quotation marks, that the Democrat Party is heading the wrong direction, are going to have a really difficult time in the next 4 years.